Welcome to our March webinar, a collaborative presentation of the Federation for Children with Special Needs and the Recruitment Training and Support Center, RTSC. Today's webinar, Everybody Works, Eventually, presented by Kathleen Pignone, Transition Specialist, at the Neuropsychology and Education Services for Children and Adolescents, or NESCA. Kathleen has served as a career development director at Bay Cove Academy, as well as a rehabilitation consultant.
I am here today to talk about paving the way for youth and young adults, specifically with social emotional issues, to transition from high school to life. So whether you're a young adult that you're working with or that is your child, or we all want to go to work eventually. So I'm going to jump right in. Feel free to ask questions. I work at NESCA currently. Most of what I do is transition assessments, working with parents, families, and schools, collaborating on planning, and I also have clients that I do direct social skills and life skills training with as well. So, transition. This is the nightmare picture of your child playing video games in the basement that we all do not want for our young adult. But transition is, it's different for everyone, right? It looks different for kids with social emotional issues, as any change does when you have somebody dealing with anxiety, depression. Making change is always going to create higher levels of those things. So when you're asked to be more independent, even though as a young adult or a teenager that is actually what you're seeking, it's a little scary, and as well as it is exciting. So some of our youth may appear unmotivated, as that nice young man in the picture appears, but they are working on a variety of issues while trying to learn a variety of life skills. They're transitioning from being a student that's been their only identity for most of their lives, and now we're asking them to enter the world of work and to make all these decisions when they haven't really been given that kind of power or taught how to make those decisions well. So I like this slide because one of the things that I always say, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not going to change. So if the young man is happy sitting in the basement playing the video games and somebody's feeding him and not asking him to be doing other things, then he's probably not going to be uncomfortable enough to change. As I say to my clients, I don't ask anyone to do what I don't do myself. So for me, it's like, I can tell you how many calories I should have, I can tell you how much exercise I need, but I start changing what I put in my mouth when my pants don't fit me. So it applies to all of us. It's not just for people who have a diagnosis. So what does it mean to successfully do this launching pattern? It means different things to different people. Sometimes it means going to a post-secondary, to college, to training. Sometimes it means going right to employment. Sometimes it means doing a little of both. Sometimes it means going to a transition program that is a residential program that's away from your family and friends, and you're working on different things. But one of the things we know is we all have to be on the same page. So we want to be having those conversations with the young adult about what are they picturing, what do they see as launching. Sometimes we make assumptions that kids want to go away to school. Some kids are terrified to go away to school, so we have to be having those conversations. If you're, working with a young adult who is emotionally struggling, there's going to be a lot more factors to be considered when you're picturing kind of the next steps. So we can't lose sight of those. And as I mentioned earlier, you really need to be thinking about, as we're transitioning and as we're changing, the levels of anxiety and the levels of stress are going to get higher. Sometimes we encounter some programming where people say, transition, they've passed the graduation requirements, they've passed the MCAS, it's not my job to teach them to do laundry, right? So how do we know what that magical moment of transition is, as we're talking kind of the legal piece? And I think one of the things as parents and caregivers we need to pay attention to is that if you are struggling with emotional stability, it's always going to be a struggle, right? So this may be a lifelong struggle. So what we need to think about is how we're all accepting and talking about that, how we're all kind of using common language to say that, some of this mental health stuff needs to be addressed. We have to make accommodations around those things when it comes to post-secondary education and employment. But that doesn't mean that either the person's not ready to launch or that the person is ready to launch and then they've met all the other criteria. So we really have to kind of be talking about, when we talk about, trying to get my next slide, oh, got it. So I'm a big fan of the contingency plan because most of us don't, go like this when we're trying to move along in our lives. I've had tens of jobs. I did not, in kindergarten when they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I didn't say a transition specialist at NESCA. I didn't even know there was such a job. So clearly none of us are kind of just going to college, going 4 years straight, coming out with this perfect job. That's just not how it works. So we always want to have a plan B, and that has to look like a balance. So we want to be talking about the big picture and knowing that that creates some anxiety, but we lessen the anxiety by having these short, attainable goals so we can walk ourselves through the planning process. So there's transition, there's planning, there's who's responsible for making sure those plans get done, and all of this actually happens when we foster social motivation and engagement. So one of my biggest soapboxes is employment, because I feel like that is how you're going to be, everyone works eventually. So that's how you're going to learn some of these things. When you go to school, especially for those who struggle in school, the math teacher doesn't say, oh, thank God Kathleen's here. I couldn't teach math without you. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. But when you go to a job, somebody's got to walk that dog, somebody's got to, fold those clothes, somebody's got to wait on those customers, whatever it is, that you have a role and an identity that is now your own personal thing that nobody else has. You're not just a student, you're not just a daughter, you're not just a friend. So I think employment is a really nice way to do that. How do we do this? How do we develop that kind of inner strength? We talk about the things we're good at. Transition is actually fun and positive and strength-based. It's about all the things that you like and that you can do and that you're good at. We want them to understand that, I do not have a name tag that says Dream Crusher, but I have been accused by several young adults that is, I totally can be on Broadway. I totally can be an NBA star. I can be a rapper. I'm going to be a professional gamer and a YouTuber, and nobody's going to stop me. And I say, you go with your bad self. That's great, because we want that desire. But we also need to make sure that they have the skills necessary to be successful in whatever it is that they want. So I'm not here to say, don't be realistic, but I'm also here to say if somebody has an inner drive to whatever it is, we want to foster that. We want to take that and sow those seeds. We want not only all of you who are joining the webinar, but the young adults to know what those key community resources are, that asking for help is a continual process. People have supervisors. People have, when I go home, my parents don't say, oh, you're independent, so you have to plan a meal, shop for it, budget for it, get the ingredients, prep it, cook it, and my parents just make dinner, and we all have, right? So what we're really looking at is what I like to call interdependence as opposed to this independence. And I think that lessens the anxiety for all of us, and especially for the young person, because I think as much as they want to be independent, which means they stand on their own 2 feet, they don't need to ask, they don't need to have as much help as they may have had in the past. We also need for them to know that there are resources in college, that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to have a note taker. It's okay to say to your supervisor, I need one extra break because of, it makes I'm able to work better if I have just one extra 5-minute break, whatever it is. So why is this launch, for using that analogy, more intricate? It's the developmental time when we are trying to be individuate from our families, right, and be grown and adults. But it's also we don't have any of that life experience. We don't have any of the we don't have all or many of the skills because we haven't had to, right? We haven't had to be the sole decision maker. We haven't had to be the sole executive function planner of things. I didn't have to plan my social life in high school because all my friends, I saw them every day in school. In college, you go back to your room and maybe your roommate's there, maybe there's not, there's a whole building full of people, but you have to be your social, executive functioning person. You have to plan things. You have to seek people out to have dinner with. So we want them to see that this interdependence piece is really what we're talking about, that they're not isolated, they're not alone. Again, when we're talking about young adults with any sort of kind of mental health issue, it's a scary thing to feel like you're going to be left or you're going to be alone on your own trying to do all these things. So we want them to be striving to do independent things as much as it makes sense in that setting, right? So they have to be able to accept help and know who to ask for help, right? So when I'm working directly with young adults, a lot of the feedback I get is like, wow, you're asking me to do all these things, because the more action, the more involved they are, the more that they own the process, right? So if they're saying, I want to be a YouTuber, and I'm saying, okay, well, let's just gather facts, right? Let's say how many famous YouTubers there are and how many of them actually make money. And so I'm not saying you can't be, but I'm saying let's do some research. Okay, well, how did they get there? Well, they learned about all these products. Okay, well, they worked in retail. Okay, well, they had 14 jobs. What were those jobs? So we have to figure out what it is that they want, that they're doing it, and we want them to get out and do. And the more they do, hopefully, the more experiences they have. The other piece is that this, that sometimes gets missed, is that feedback loop. So kind of this support and guidance piece is, so when I worked with, I'm working with somebody who is struggling to finish high school, but is taking like a dual enrollment class and has some mental health issues. And this young woman is really struggling with like still living at home, not being independent or financially able to be on her own, but how to manage being a young adult living still with your parents. And we came up with a mind shift. She was, asking for money. She was asking for more stuff in her room, to change her room, to take over the office, and the parents were feeling bombarded, and she was feeling like her needs weren't getting met. So we flipped the switch and flipped the script and said, okay, I said, you have a menu here. You are a service provider to these people. You can be a dog walker, you can wash everyone's towels and sheets, you can go grocery shopping, you drive, you can do errands. I'm like, instead of asking for money, say, here's my menu of services that I can provide you. Can these be things that I can be compensated for? What dual enrollment is, that there's an option when you are a high school student to take a community college level course while still in high school. So you have to go through the same process. You have to take the AccuPlacer, which is the test that they give at the community college. It's a computerized test, and they see what level you're at. So you have to, make sure that you can do the work. You're welcome to any appropriate accommodations that make sense. And, as transition specialists, we recommend this a lot to students who are in high school, who are interested in attending college, because it gives them really an idea of the level of work and the level of executive functioning and organizing that they need to be able to do to finish a college class. The things that I think students forget is, right now they're in school 6 hours and they may have an hour or two or whatever of homework. In college, you might be in school for 6 hours in 1 week and you'll have 12 hours of homework, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to figure out, and you have 7 days of 24 hours to fit that in, but it's up to you to decide how you're going to get that in on time. And I think that's the piece that we really see young adults kind of go, oh, I didn't really understand, because, the bell rings and they go to the next thing and the teacher says, get out your whatever, be ready for class. We want the young person to already say, be in a class where the teacher's like, show me you're ready. We don't want to be scripting for them all the things that they need.
We do have a question, which I think might be a good point to ask this, is do you have any advice for children that have very few, if any, interests or motivation?
Yes, I have lots of ideas. So one is exposure. I was talking about that earlier. Volunteer work, it's harder and harder to find, I will say. I think, people say that a lot, but, in my experience, it's, in this economy, it's harder to find. But use your networking and use the people that you know and be creative. For me, it's usually finding something that sparks anything, even if it's not super realistic or super attainable. What we do in our assessments is we start giving choices. So that's the other piece. A lot of people who may learn differently or who are struggling with anxiety, like their brain is really busy doing lots of things, and they can't come up with these novel ideas. So having them job shadow, giving them a list of 10 jobs and saying, if you had to pick one of these, which one would you choose?
Okay.
Narrowing it down, I think, helps.
Okay.
Great. So this is a very wordy slide, and I apologize, but the reason I have it up is because this is what we're talking about when we say, such and such public school is obligated to provide transition services. So a coordinated set of activities. So right there, it means that everybody needs to be talking in a room together about transition, not just reading out loud the 3-year evals of the kids and making goals and then the meeting's over and when we get to the transition planning form, we don't have time, right? So a lot of people, I recommend having a separate meeting for transition. I know it's not always convenient, or having a really clear agenda, because transition gets pushed away, and then all of a sudden we're seniors and we're freaking out because we haven't been planning all along. So this should be starting not just at 14 when you have the letter of the law, but we like to start in middle school, 12, 13. So results oriented. So just like the IEP process, right? You have to have goals that are attainable, that you can measure, right? It has to be academic and functional. So when we're talking about assessment, when we move into how do we figure out where somebody is in their transition from high school to life, we want to be looking at, yes, can they do college level work? What are their academic skills? But how do they function outside of the home? Sometimes kids do really well in school and, they crash when they come home because they've used all of their focus and positive energy, and they come home and they just, I can't do homework, I can't do it, That's okay if we know how we're going to transition that to college or transition that to, okay, you maybe you want to work the third shift, you don't want to work first thing in the morning. So you want to move them from school to post-secondary to post-school activities. And there's 3 things that you have to cover. So in the IEP process, right, the vision drives everything. So we need to make sure we're addressing post-secondary education. So that could be, for some kids, college. For a lot of kids who aren't interested in college, it could be technical training, or it could also be on-the-job training. It could be adult education. It can be arts and physical activity and yoga and all different things. And then it has to talk about employment, which sometimes you will get, public schools will kind of push that aside, I think, traditionally, because they're trying to get somebody ready for college. They get very narrowly focused. We want to always make sure that we're still talking about that, because it may take me longer to learn math. It's also going to take me longer to learn the rules of the workplace, right? Because there's a lot of rules that aren't written. And then independent living, as we talked about. I think this is the one that trips up a lot of people or teams, I should say, is because that means different things to different people. And I actually was at a team meeting where a public school representative said something to the effect, I'll tell you what I heard, not what they said. What I heard was so-and-so was always going to have autism. So, they're always going to need support. So, what is the public school's kind of end game? Why does it have to, legally, just because it's 22, is this kid going to make measurable, observable progress? And I didn't like the way it was said, but it is something that needs to be talked about. When we're talking about kids who have emotional, social issues, they may not go away, as they grow up. They might go through kind of these waves. They might get more intense as we ramp up the expectations. That's, of course, going to happen. So we want the whole group to be on the same page. So it has to be based on needs, right? Strengths, preferences, and interests. So this is where it's different than the educational goals. This is saying, hey, you're great at this. Hey, this is interesting to you. Hey, let's make goals around those things instead of, hey, I know math's hard. Let's have 45 math goals and keep talking about how you're doing in math. And they don't want to talk about math anymore. It's like, you don't have to do, college level math in every job. So let's move on. And then instruction, services, how are we going to do this, right? So how are we going to develop these skills? So that's the regulation.
Where does DDS and MRC work into the transition planning process?
Great question. So I am a big fan of early and often. Public schools and those two agencies disagree with me, but I'm the expert. So there. So I will say to parents, especially as you're getting 16, 17, 18, invite them to the table. I know DDS people that go to 14-year-old IEPs. I've had them come. And I think why we want them to come early is because we want the whole group to have a understanding of what's going to happen after high school, right? So if your child is going to be somebody who utilizes DDS and MRC services, then you want to know what that's going to look like. And not just at that last transition meeting where you can't kind of really go, oh, that's what it's going to look like. And nobody's the bad guy. It's just that a lot of public schools don't really know what DDS and MRC can offer. And a lot of, every year the budgets change and every year services do change. So, that's why the 688 referral is important. That's when your child when your child is 2 years away from their graduation date, you want to be filling out the 688 referral form. I think schools are pretty good about passing it out. I don't know if they're really good about explaining it, but what it is it's actually a really important financial document, because what you're saying is my child in 2 years will need, and you pick a service provider, will need funds from DDS so that they can start paying attention to how many people are going to be in that pool. So I got a little off track, but I wanted to make sure I explained it.
And that also includes DMH as well.
Yeah, I mean, I find that MRC is pretty open to coming. I find DDS is pretty open to coming.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So, transition planning, right? So, first of all, it's a mindset, right? So, when I am working with parents and when I'm working with teams, when I come to the meeting, I try to create language that's different. I try to create kind of an energy that's different. And what I'm trying to, I had a lovely parent come with me. She showed me her son's IEP. He's 20. He, can print his name really nicely and neatly, and that little tiny thing we have to sign in the IEP. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so gorgeous. And she's like, yeah. And I said, he should have a signature. And she looked at me, and I was like, ooh, probably shouldn't have said should. Sorry. Because what I'm thinking is, this is a 20-year-old young man. And if he can print his name that neatly, he has the right and the dignity to learn how to sign his name like a 20-year-old man, regardless of what his other skill set is. So I looked at it fine motorically with my transition lens, and that was my first reaction. And when I explained it to her, there was this moment of like, oh. So what I'm getting at is when I sit at the meeting and they talk about vocational skills and transition, I say time out. We're not practicing anymore. We're preparing. We're taking action. We're not going to a job that's part of a job and carving out like 3 things in 1 hour. We're working towards competitive employment, which is in a typical retail, fast food, entry-level position is a 6-hour shift with a 15-minute break. No benefits, no overtime, right? And if you're lucky, you get the same schedule or the same hours weekly, but not even the same days, and you don't know until, right? And we're teaching these young people like, oh, you get a schedule, you show up at the same time every day. I mean, that's not how it works all the time. So we have to be really paying attention to the language we use and what we're actually teaching and preparing them for. So what's gonna work? Teamwork, right? It was a Wonder Pets thing when my kids were little, I think. So sorry if you missed the reference. But so we all have to have membership and ownership. So most importantly, the student, right, the young person. I'm a huge fan of, doing this, but you don't have to have a transition specialist. You can have somebody on the team who's paying attention to this. That's really what you want. It could be you because you've gone to this lovely webinar. Now you know. Anybody who makes sense, right? So I said, thanks for the earlier question, adult agencies, community resources, if they have an independent living center they're working with, employers, typically they can't go to team meetings because of their work schedule, but getting their input, getting real feedback from employers and bringing it to the meeting, obviously post-secondary. I referred to this earlier, right? The vision drives everything. So when we're looking at the individual education plan, the legal document that's driving this whole transition train, we have to make sure the vision is clear and that it's student-centered, but also that it covers those three things, right? So if they say Kathleen wants to go to college and study such and such, and she wants to live on campus and get her driver's license, you haven't talked about a job yet, right? So that doesn't mean that your kid has to do any kind of job. It just means you have to start thinking about what that's going to be. I think that we sometimes get stuck in keeping it the same, right? A 14-year-old's vision and a 16-year-old's vision are very different, as is an 18 and a 20 and a 22-year-old's vision. So a lot of times, I'll go to these meetings and people are like, oh, he wants to be, we already know the vision. It's like, no. We want to make sure that it is what's going to happen in the next year. What are we all going to do when it comes to transition? Are we going to work on employment skills? Are we working on hygiene skills? Are we work on social communication skills? That doesn't mean get a driver's license, get a job, apply to college. It means all of those soft skills, those flexible thinking, anything that you can think of that will move them closer to being able to be more independent. So, I like the strength-based approach, obviously. I think that that's another way to kind of drive the conversation in a more positive way, too, because if you have an individual education plan, you've been struggling with education, right? So, and a lot of these meetings have been talking about all the things that are hard for you or difficult for you. So let's change it. Let's talk about what you're really good at and what you're going to be doing next. Oops, sorry. Don't mind me. Okay. So how does this all start? It starts with effective transition planning. So that's driven by the vision. The student's the center of it, right? Strengths and interests are being covered. Not just going to college, beyond, outside of it, while in school, making sure that they join clubs so they're not socially isolated, making sure that they, have a roommate so that they don't socially isolate, things like that. How do we know the student is moving in these skills? We measure them, and we do assessments. We do assessments. So what is this? This is what it's supposed to be. Ongoing, which means that when you do one at 16, that's not the only one you do. Or as most public high schools and education follows, like, oh, we do all that in 11th and 12th grade. I'm like, no, we don't. So we need to be kind of pushing that a little bit because it's going to change over time if we're allowing the time for young people to start thinking about it, to be creating these visions for themselves. And needs, preferences, interests, so that's positive, it's what do they need, what that we can provide that's reasonable, right? That's my role as a parent. I say to parents a lot when you're coming to these transition meetings, I like to open with, yes, these are all the things I want, and here's what I'm going to do as part of the team. I'm going to teach the laundry. I'm going to do the driver's ed. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get him waking up on his own. I'm not going to be the alarm clock. I'm not going to be the executive functioner anymore. He has to plan stuff with his friends. I'm not going to call my friends and they hang out with, my kids, that thing. So, and this last piece is crucial, and I think it gets missed. So it has to relate to the demands of current and future working, educational living, and personal and social environments. So I think I said earlier, the part-time work, competitive employment is not, get up at 9, punch in the clock, and it's, you don't know what your schedule is going to be every week. You have to, how do you ask for a day off when you don't even know what your schedule is? How do you make a doctor's appointment if you don't know what your schedule is? That's executive functioning. We got to be teaching those skills. So this is what it should include. And I do think that some schools are doing a lot of this. And I do have some parents come to me and say, what should I ask for? So, I think that one of the things is to remember that you do need to ask for specific things, and I'll go over that, but you also need to kind of look at what you already have. You have MCAS, you have grades, you have progress reports, you have maybe some speech language, anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to be making sure we're not missing anything. Planning inventory assessment, that's when we were talking about, those young people who are like, I don't really know. We give them, some of the assessments I have 180 jobs to choose from, and they have to say they like, dislike, or neutral, and we can kind of gather things from that. Formal and informal measures, there's definitely standardized assessments that I give, but there's also other things that I do that are more informal, like questionnaires and situational observations. We want clear measurements of frequency and level of support dependence. I'm going to take a sip. Level of support and dependence is also one that I think gets missed. So I have a pretty well-functioning young adult. They're getting their homework done. Their hygiene's not an issue. Some days are harder than others to get out of bed, but for the most part, things are going well. School's going well. How do they do in their downtime, right? Is this a person who, when they have this level of expectation and support, they can function, they can achieve, they can do what is being asked of them? When given kind of left to their own devices, do they, one, know that they can do it? They don't need somebody else to be doing it for them. They know they can do it with a little help, and they know who they can ask to help them with it. They know they can't do it, and they need to ask for help. For a lot of young adults, we are not making that explicit. The example I gave earlier is, when you're teaching kids executive functioning skills, a lot of teachers are like, all right, grab your pens, we're going to start taking notes. Teachers who are paying attention to executive function skills will say, show me you're ready. And the kid has to figure out, oh wait, show me you're ready means I need a pen, I need my homework from last night, which made it into my backpack, which made it on the bus, which made it off the bus, which made it into my locker, which made my homework here with me now, right? We always include what's going on at home, what's going on in school, and what else is going on. So if there's employment, we do observations, we interview employers. If there's other agencies or workers, we talk to them. I love the situational assessments. I think when we're talking about adaptive functioning, so how do you actually really do in kind of some known places and some novel places, I think we get a lot of information from those.
Looking for a little bit more guidance on what the executive functioning skills are looking like on an IEP.
Okay.
Can you expand on that just a little bit? And, who teaches those skills? I think you spoke earlier about speech and language. I think most people think articulation.
Right.
As opposed to thinking social pragmatic skills.
Right.
So maybe if you could talk a little bit about
Sure.
how to reflect that on an IEP.
Yeah, so you gave me a couple things. One is what are the skills? So I think what we're talking about is what we would say is social pragmatics. Other people might say social communication skills, social functioning, social communication functioning. Speech and language therapists typically are people who can help with that. But when I'm looking at an IEP, right, so I'm starting with the vision. So I'm saying I want my student to be employed and pursue post-secondary, you would be more specific. In both of those settings, what are the social skills that your young adult needs? If it's being able to make an introduction, being able to have the volume that's not like, hi, or nervous talking, I mean, whatever it is. I find all of my too cool high school kids are really too cool in school, super cool in my car, and get in the interview room and they're like, I can't even hear what they're saying. I'm like, what? They were just like rapping in my car and screaming and yelling and, doing whatever to people next to me, and now you can't even speak. So I think what you want to do is think about the skills that your particular young person needs to be successful in those environments. When I was talking earlier about when you go to the team meetings and we want to be talking differently, I used to always say at team meetings, my job is to teach all the skills. So I was a career counselor, was to teach all the skills that once you're out of high school you will need. Once you walk out that door, what do you need? You need to be able to make appropriate greetings. You need to be able to do active listening. You need to be able to know your volume, your word choice in different settings. You need to be able to stop someone if they're kind of going too fast and have a way that's comfortable for you to be like, wait, let me just repeat what you said because I'm not sure I got all of it. I mean, all of those things. So you want to be able to set a goal on your IEP that you can achieve in 1 year, mm-hmm. right? And then have, and I would ask directly at the school, like, who is in charge of, here on this team, of teaching these executive functioning skills? A lot of the assessments that I do, I find that that's one of the areas of weakness in most special education programming, because we're all focused on academics, right? And that takes longer, so we want to spend mm-hmm. more time on it. But I think, and then we have the other extreme who, when you ask them, well, who's doing executive functioning skills? They're like, it's embedded in the curriculum. It's embedded in the curriculum. Well, that would be great if every human was a robot and we were all doing the same thing. We're not. Mm-hmm. So there still has to be someone who's training the staff on it, that they have a clear plan of what is embedded. What's embedded? Tell me what that looks like. Is it every teacher says, show me you're ready for class? Okay, that's one. So that's organization. Executive functioning is organization. It's transitioning from one to the next. Like, does the bell ring? Or do they have to know what time it is? Like, turn off the bells. At 1:15, the bell should be ringing. Well, it's now 1:10, so I need to know that at 1:15, I've got to be ready to go because I have 2 minutes to get to my next class. So it's all of those things that are that you want to get specific with, because they get lost. Mm-hmm. And age and stage appropriately, you don't have to do them all every year, but you can kind of like pick a group of them. So it might be like organizational skills of that, but you do, and again, by putting it as an IEP goal, then it's not only attainable and measurable, but someone's responsible for it. Mm-hmm. This slide is just kind of planning areas to consider. We want to make sure we're considering all of these areas. Housing. So, some people are in a place where, okay, your child turns 18, you want to be filling out Section 8 because it's a 10-year waiting list, right? And people are like, what? Section 8? My kid? It's a 10-year waiting list. Yes, you want to do it at 18, so by 28, you might have it. I don't know. But it also might be like, have you ever slept away from home? Have you ever had a roommate? Do you, how you keep your room? Like, now you have to keep half of a room in a way that you both can agree on. So do you have negotiation skills? Do you have diplomacy? Do you have active listening skills where you can kind of fake it till you make it? All these things need to be considered.
There's a great book out there, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called The Naked Roommate.
Yes, I put it in some of my assessments.
It's a fabulous book for parents and students to read about the questions you will face and the situations you'll face when you end up having to live in a roommate situation, be it college or an apartment.
Right.
Or,
and most of us in Massachusetts in our teens and 20s can't afford to live without roommates, so it's going to happen to you eventually.
So it's a great resource.
It is, and it's entertaining, and I read it with some of my students, and it gives us, it gives me an opportunity to teach it. But I think teachers can use it in school, parents can use it to have conversations with their kids. So I think that for me, I do a lot of focusing on employment, because I honestly and truly believe that is where most of us find our identity outside of school, right? So what does it look like? Not only identity and role, and I talked about that. For me, that feedback of self-esteem, that, oh, I did that, not that was done for me thing. It's, if you've ever heard Temple Grandin speak, she's amazing in so many ways, but one of my favorite stories she told was she got a job for somebody that she loved. She loved the supervisor. She loved the job. It was one of those, for people who don't know, she has autism, and she's an expert, and she's a genius, and she designs and all these amazing things. And she did not have the best hygiene. And she never knew it until her favorite supervisor pulled her aside and said, "Gotta tell you, not so fresh, can't really work like that." And she said, that person had meaning to me. That moment had, I wanted that job, so that was her hygiene trigger. I say to parents all the time, we have to find a reason for them to want to do it, not for us to want them to do it, right? So immediate feedback in authentic teaching in a job is pretty straightforward, right? Like your supervisor, I have a lot of kids who, they'll say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't do that at work, you would get fired." And I'm like, actually, no, you wouldn't get fired. What would happen is you would get one less shift, then you'd get no shifts, and then they would stop calling you and then say, "Oh, we just don't need you." Not because you are fireable, then that's more work for them, but because maybe you're showing up late. Maybe when you come, you're not, you came out of bed and we got the hair like this, but you're looking in the mirror, so you're not remembering that we have to do the circle look, right? The clothes aren't as clean and neat as they could be. They, I have these kids who look at this and they don't know what's going on back there. And we got to know what's going on back there, because we're working around people and they're going to walk around us. So the way that I kind of wrap my brain around it, as I look at it just like every other area of life, there's these developmental stages. So learning phase is that phase where they're like, what is a job? What is that? What are benefits? What's a career? What's the difference between a job and a career? What's volunteer work? What am I interested in? Responsibility is, that volunteer job or community scouts activities or something where they have this responsibility and they're starting to kind of own I'm expected to do something. I'm in charge of making sure it happens. No one needs to remind me because I'm intrinsically motivated and this has meaning to me. That's usually a paycheck for most of us, right? So worker identity is when they really see I'm an employee, the cashing of the check, I am needed here. When I observe kids and when they walk in and everyone's like, hey, Kathleen, I'm like, there you go. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen at school. Some schools it might, most schools it doesn't, right? The social interaction that just happens without even those of us who probably do it all the time every day, don't even notice we're doing it. That fuels that self-esteem, that fuels that I see you, thanks for coming, I'm glad you're here, you have meaning, you have a role here, and then kind of, how are they managing it independently and moving on with it. So we want to do this through job counseling, job coaching, on-the-job training. We do community coaching, lots of places do, there's different agencies that do it. MRC offers the pre-employment training services. So if your young adult is 16 and on an IEP, you or the school can refer them to Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, MRC. And unfortunately, you have to go through the same orientation that an adult would, which is somewhat off-putting to some of our young adults who aren't quite ready to be around others who may either be the same or not the same, but have, kind of identifying as a person with a disability. And I actually think that that's one of the things that we need to teach young adults is kind of owning who they are. And I think that happens when you're applying to schools naturally, right? Oh, you got your reach schools, you got your safety schools, right? Well, why is that a reach school? Why is that a safety school? We don't have kids. If I have a kid who's not college able, I need to teach them that, like, you have, autism. It just means that your brain works differently than other people's brains. How does it affect you? What language do you want to use to talk about it? Do you not want to use the word autism? Do you want to use a different word? Like, those conversations need to be had. I have parents come up to me and say, middle school kids, like, when do I tell my kid they have autism? And I'm like, pretty sure they already know. But I think it's a scary thing for parents. I think we are protective of our children, which we should be and we need to be. But, I think mental health has this stigma, right? So if we're not talking about it in a way that says that this, like, everybody has anxiety, right? So, and actually we need anxiety because anxiety motivates us to get things done and gives us a sense of urgency. Some people call them deadlines, right? So we have to know what our levels of anxiety are. So we have to use the word anxiety to talk about it, and it's okay. And it's okay if yours are different than mine and medication helps you or, yoga helps you, whatever it is. We want to be talking about it. So this is my attempt at a funny cartoon, but it's not. And I don't have an audience, so it's hard to tell. So we really want to make sure that they're getting real experience, that it matches them. So, I think it's with the, it's difficult, especially with those kids who don't know, to try to find something. So if you can't find the thing that they want to do, you might find the environment they want to work in. You might find a supervisor who you think would be a really good kind of match for them socially or patient with them or whatever it is. So you want to be paying attention to this. So at NESCA, we call it coaching. There's a piece that's clinical, right? So we want to make sure that as we're transitioning, that the students are still getting not just if they have clinical needs in high school, that they're going to know how to get their clinical needs met. We want to make sure that they know what the resources are outside of them. Every college campus not only has like counseling services, but they typically have student support groups, student-run organizations around, mental health and awareness and trying to get away from these stigmas. And college is an exciting and great place, but it can also be a very isolating and scary place. And again, we're taking our kids where we put them in a place where they were surrounded by people all the time, and then taking them to a place where they have to find those people on their own. And if they don't have the skills or the resources or the mental health to access that, it can lead you to a dark place. There's a little bit more about the social pragmatic skills. When I talked about those phases, for each of those phases, I actually have specific goals. And, for in the beginning, I one of my goals is like introducing yourself. So it's like, how do you introduce yourself? What's a not too soft, not too strong handshake, the volume, all those things. I work with a lot of students on leaving a voicemail. Everyone texts, right? So nobody knows how to leave a voicemail anymore because nobody talks on the phone. So I have 20-somethings that I work with, and I'm like, we script out what we're going to say, because also nobody answers their phone anymore, so you have to know how to leave a voicemail, right? Because they're expecting you to text them, so why would you, So, but
I think also the outgoing message is appropriate.
Yes.
Because I know that my child in school's outgoing message used to be, "Hey peeps, I don't like anyone, so leave me alone. If you're my parents, leave me a message." So that was not a good response when she was looking for a job.
Right.
To have a job coach, so we had to have that changed.
I used to have students who would have this really, really loud music that I couldn't even get through. I was like, I can't even leave a message. It's hurting my ear. Yeah, and appropriate email address. That's another big one. It's the first thing people look at on your resume is your email, and if it's not appropriate, they take the other stack of all the appropriate ones, and yours goes in the circular file, which we call the trash. So, I think we're getting close to out of time. This is just talking a little bit more about what we do when we're coaching.
In light of that, there was a question in the beginning, and I'll just ask, do you work with students that are have graduated from high school? Do you work with postgraduate students?
I do, yep.
Okay.
Right now my caseload is, I think the majority of my caseload is about like 23 to 28.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And I find that those are the people that are kind of like, have some level of skills, like maybe can get a job, but they can't keep it, or they have, they went to college and it wasn't the right fit or the right time for them, and they can't figure out what those missing pieces. And that's what a lot of our time is spent doing. We go, and we don't just sit in my office, we go out in the community, and, one example I always give is I went to the Dunkin' Donuts with this 20-something-year-old, and the person at the counter said, "Oh, how's it going?" And she started to tell him how it was going and what her night was like, and I can like literally, I don't even have to turn around. I can feel the line getting longer behind me. I can hear the sigh and nothing. Like she's just going and going, and I'm thinking, oi. So then we sit down. I'm like, oh, and she's like, oh, I did great. I was friendly. I made eye contact. I counted my change. I got my receipt. So all the great skills, right, that you need to work on. I said, what had started the conversation? And they said, well, he's asked me how I was doing or something. And I told him, and I'm like, okay, so in food service, especially like fast food service where there's lines, that actually means, may I take your order, please? And she was like, okay. And I said, and no judgment, right? It just was one of those moments in time that I can't do that in my office. I can't observe that that's what's actually happening. I can't observe, like, I went did an observation of a young man, and one of the things I wanted him to do is like, we'll have them go to a mall that they're familiar with or a place they're familiar with to shop, and say like, go try on shoes that you would wear for work or whatever. Well, he got this sales gal that brought him out this shoe and that shoe, and they kept getting more expensive, and she's like, do you want to try these? Yeah. And we're leaving, and he's like in this great, his mood like took off. I'm like, wow, you didn't even buy the shoes, like, but you're like, he's like, oh no, I'm going to go back and give her my number. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, she was really into me. I'm like, no, that's called customer service. That is not really into you. No. And he was like, what? I'm like, yes. And each shoe got more expensive. She was like trying to like make you pay more money. He was like, they were? I'm like, yes, they were. And she did a great job. Like if you had the money, you probably would have bought those. And he was just like, oh my, and just didn't have enough experience on his own. Like, where are kids going and trying on shoes and getting customer service? Everything's bought online. I mean, these are not experiences that through in our 20s where our kids are getting. I skipped through a few slides. You guys are going to get a copy of the slides anyways. Anyway, pardon me. The minimizing accommodations, I think, is really another important piece that I don't want to get lost. I talked about it a little earlier, and I feel like what it means to me is making explicit to kids that when you have a learning center class, that somebody is organizing your homework from you, that somebody is asking you if you have this. All of those things are things that you need to be successful right now in high school. Great. Do you know that you're getting them? Do you know how, when you don't have them, you're going to do it yourself, or what you're going to replace? I feel like a lot of times, this assistive technology assessments come in, and they say you should try the smart pen, the smartphone, whatever. I think it's a great idea if you practice it and use it in high school and know what it actually can do for you and what you need it for, because otherwise you're just buying something that's just going to sit and collect dust. I think that I like this one. Pacing yourself that the list is continually shrinking requires mindfulness. I think that, and I'm doing it now. I'm like throwing all of these things at you. breathe. Know that this is a process. It's ongoing. It's like plan A is gonna go to plan B, and once you get to Z, you're gonna start all over again at A, and that's okay, because that's what this process is. It's a process. It's not one plan, one strategy, one skill. It's a lot of it. And this is what we're looking for, right? Doing it over and over. That's why I say, like, go to work, go to this job, go to this experience, try this, even find out what you don't like, find out what you hate, find out what you love, find out something, but you're going to learn something out of everything you do. And especially for those of our kids who aren't like going to generalize like that automatically, it's our job to always be giving them that feedback. I used to, when kids went on an internship, they had to do their own assessments, like, a little checklist and like 2 things, like, did you use any writing at work? How did you problem solve at work? Did you have a problem? What did you do? Well, I asked my supervisor. I'm like, oh, so you know what now means? What? You don't ever need help from me again. What? No, yes, I do. No. You know how to ask for help. So I won't have to say, do you need help? How's it going? Are you okay? Do you got that? Did you put your name on it? Did you get the date? Nope. I'm going to say, you know how to ask for help. So I'm going to stand here and I'm going to wait for that to happen. And the more that I do that, the more you're going to come to me. And every time you do, I'm going to be like, you did it again, right? So that you know that you have that skill. Mm-hmm. And you're owning it and it's a skill that we all need to have, regardless of what label anybody's put on us. I talked a little bit about technology. I think it in transition, it's a nice piece to for kids with any sort of ability or disability. Like I think one of the ones that's not on here, talking about having kids wake themselves up, right? Mm-hmm. Having kids do their own executive functioning. I like a lot of those apps that help you with distractions or keeping you on task. I find that a lot of my clients, those work. I'm like almost right at the end, so if anyone has questions.
We have a couple of questions. Someone asked whether schools are responsible for providing work experience. And one thing that I had thought about earlier is that in Massachusetts, most high schools require 60 hours of community service in order to graduate. I don't think people necessarily look at the community service as job experience.
Right.
Which it certainly can be a place to be able to do that and work on job skills if we look at it in the right way. Right. But is school, when you're working on transition, are they responsible for helping provide work experience for kids?
So what I would say, if the young person's vision is to eventually work somewhere, then they need to have goals that support that vision. So it might mean executive functioning goals, it might mean social communication goals, or it might mean employment. I think it depends on the young person. If this is a young person who has a really high level of anxiety, is in a separate school, getting lots of support around that, I would expect that a program like that would want to support that person in employment and helping that person access employment in a way that makes sense for them. So the answer is, like, I don't think there's anything written down that says they have to help a kid get a job, but the IEP says that part of their vision has to include employment, so they have to be moving them in the direction of getting employment. And if the school says, oh, we don't have a work, I actually had, this woman played me a voicemail from a school person, so again, I'll tell you what I heard, not what they said. It's, oh, well, your kid's like in the college track, so we don't help those kids find jobs. If you want your kid to find a job, we'll put them in the voc. I was like, what? I'm like, people go to high schools all the time and do you have any high school kids to do this job? Like, we're not asking you to create a job in the building and teach them hand over. We're just saying do you have connections? The mom had literally said, does anyone in the guidance or somewhere where you get people who know they're looking for high school kids, and that was the answer she got, and I was like, whoa. Mm-hmm. But I do think that special education, right? We're great at making sure that our kids get the academic education that they need. But one of the things, that's why transition is so important, is there's a whole other world of other things, the social skills, the soft skills, the employment skills, the organizational skills, the how to manage your time skills. Mm-hmm. And that is part of transition.
A lot of kids are also starting to work with they're always on their smartphones. That's, you know, I personally live off the calendar on my smartphone
Right.
because it keeps all my calendars in together.
Right.
Are there any apps that, or things that you can suggest to tie in with a kid who's used to working with technology to work on executive functioning things?
People always ask me this, and this is when I go, oh, that's my working memory. I can't find part of my executive function where I can't find the names of them. There are, and to be honest, if you go on the Google, you can find them. Most of them are free. My kids typically are drawn to, there's ones where you can make yourself an avatar, and you set kind of things that you have to do, like you put in your tasks, and then your person can get more powers, and there's lots of them that are kind of game-like. There's ones that, you know, you plant the seed and then you grow the tree, but you only grow the tree if you're doing all the things that you're, you know, and the only thing that I find that's difficult is, so you have a kid who doesn't have great executive functioning skills. If they're not already used to using a smartphone, it's hard for them to start. If they're not used to using a calendar, even a calendar, you know, like, so I start with, like, I use a lot of the basic apps with my 20-somethings-year-olds, like put in a reminder. I have a guy who's like, I just get home and I get on the computer and then I get distracted. So one of his things that he's learned to do, he puts a reminder in his phone to do, you know, to like fill out a job application, for example, and he just puts it on repeat like every hour, every 20 minutes or whatever, and it just keeps buzzing, and finally he's like, oh, I'll just do it, you know, and that's his way of doing it.
Great. There is so much information, and we could go on for hours.
I know.
So, and I would have so many questions for you, having two young adults. But I think we are set on time.
Okay.
I will, someone had asked to repeat, the name of the book we were talking about before is called The Naked Roommate. Harlan Cohen is the author of it, and you can find it on Amazon. I do know that for my kids, they used it actually in high school. We bought it actually as when one of my kids was looking at colleges in the college bookstore, and then the next year the school started using it in 11th grade as a way to start bringing up topics for discussion about having a roommate and transitioning to college. So it's a great book to use. And I'm sure that you have a ton of resources.
Yep.
That you have Kathleen's email as well as the phone number at NESCA if you have any information. So thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure.